Hi, everyone. I'm Russ Lowenthal with Database Security Product Management, and I'm joined today by Bettina Scheumer. Bettina is the product manager for Oracle DataSafe, and our topic for office hours in July of 2021 is going to be some changes that Bettina and her team have made to DataSafe and how target registration works. As part of today's session, we're going to talk a little bit about why we're making the changes. This is part of a larger, longer conversion effort that we're doing for DataSafe, and you'll see that develop over the next several months. We'll talk a little bit about what that effort's going to look like and what you're going to get out of this when we're done with it, which we're very excited. There's a lot to have there. Just a reminder that we are recording the call. We'll cut off the first part of this, which was just chat, before we post it, but we'll get this posted up on the Ask Tom website, usually within a couple of days of these calls finishing. We do these calls every month. This is the second of two calls. The content in both of them are identical. We hold them the second Wednesday of each month, and the idea is you just pick the one that works best with your particular schedule. As we go along, if you have questions, please enter them into the Q&A panel. You'll see that located, or a button to bring it up, located down towards the bottom of your screen. You are not limited to questions about today's topic. Anything having to do with database security is fair game. If Bettina and I don't know the answer, then we will find the answer for you. We normally have product announcements, but we're in that interesting period when the release update isn't out. That's later this month and actually next week. We've got a patch for Key Vault that was just released, but we haven't managed to get that data entered in here yet. So no real announcements this month. We're going to go straight in today's topic, which is, again, the new target registration process for DataSafe. Now, this is actually part two of four things that we're doing. But let's just back up a little bit. We released DataSafe back in 2019. And when we released DataSafe, it was really designed to help support the autonomous database. Our intention for DataSafe was to give you a place where you could do the security pieces of the shared responsibility model that we couldn't do for you as Oracle. As part of doing that, we really needed to get DataSafe production ready for our customers to use before Open World, September of 2019. Part of making that happen, because the Oracle Cloud interface was in flux at the time, was to create a standalone console for DataSafe. And we've been using that standalone console for the last couple of years. And if you're a DataSafe customer, then you're aware that what you see when you go in is a console that is not really part of the Oracle Cloud interface. It's a completely separate thing. You can even go directly there and never travel through the Oracle Cloud interface if you want to. Well, our goal is to fix this situation, and we're going to be, over the rest of this year, migrating DataSafe from its current separate console to where everything is native within the Oracle Cloud interface. We started this process several months ago, asking you to migrate what we were calling resource groups, which was a security construct used by DataSafe to help you control access to databases and operations within those databases, to migrate from resource groups to the more standard security construct of OCI compartments. Hopefully all of you have done that by now, or if not, then we're going to be asking you to do that fairly shortly. When you do this migration, if you haven't done it, you're going to log into DataSafe, and you've probably been just ignoring this pop-up, but you won't be able to ignore it much longer. But this pop-up tells you need to link your resource groups to a corresponding OCI compartment. Now, that linkage is a one-to-one mapping. There has to be a compartment for each and every resource group. You can't map a single compartment to multiple resource groups or one resource groups to multiple compartments, always one-to-one. Again, if you haven't done that migration yet, then you're going to have to do that within the next few weeks in order to continue using DataSafe. So this is where we were as of about 2 weeks ago. The preparatory step had been done, and then we began to implement phase one of the migration. And by today, phase one, which is target databases and registration wizards, have moved from the old legacy data safe console into the OCI console, is now complete. As long as you've done the preparatory step, you will be able to use these new target and registration wizards. And it's this portion that we're going to be talking about in today's session. We'll be covering what this means, having moved it to the OCI native, and we'll walk you through the different registration wizards. Now, as the year continues on, the next phase is going to move security assessment and user assessment from the DataSafe console into the OCI console. And then a month or so later, you'll see the third phase complete, which will be the final phase of the migration, which will move sensitive data discovery, data masking, and activity auditing, the remaining functions within DataSafe. Those will move to the OCI console, at which point we will decommission the separate DataSafe console, and everything will be done within OCI. Before we get into the registration wizards, I want to review a couple of things, and you will see why as we demonstrate these registration wizards to you. It's important that we do this review. I mentioned earlier, we first rolled out DataSafe in support of Autonomous Database. Well, it wasn't long before we started getting requests to support other databases, and so over the course of about a year, we expanded DataSafe to where it works with Oracle databases almost anywhere they're deployed. So DataSafe works with Autonomous Database, both shared and dedicated, Exadata Cloud Services, Database Cloud Services, database systems, Oracle databases installed on compute, and that can be on our Oracle Cloud Compute or somebody like Amazon or Azure's compute. It works with on-premises databases, and it works with Cloud at Customer. Now, for Cloud at Customer, you'll notice that I've got a couple of asterisks up to the right of the customer. That is because Cloud at Customer is currently in limited availability. It is not something that we charge extra for. I'll get into charging in just a little bit. We haven't got enough customers using it yet that we are really willing to just turn it over to automation. We want to be on the screen with you on a Zoom session or WebEx or something as you are implementing DataSafe for your Cloud at Customer databases, because we want to be sure that nothing goes wrong. We're very close to exiting limited availability, but if you are a Cloud at Customer customer, if you have Cloud at Customer, all you need to do to use DataSafe is send an email to me, russ.lowenthal@oracle.com, and we will get you started on signing up for the Cloud at Customer limited availability. If you prefer to talk to your account team, you can just let your cloud account team know, and they will reach out to me, and we'll get that set up. All right, now back to why we're reviewing this. DataSafe is sometimes included at no additional cost, the equivalent of free, and sometimes a service that costs money. And the reason this is important is as we talk about target registration, you're going to see places where we make sure you don't get charged for something without knowing about it. So as we start going through the target registration wizards later on, you're going to see places where sometimes you get asked to say, yes, I understand that if I click this next button, I start getting charged, and other places where you don't get asked that. And the reason for this is DataSafe is included, no additional costs, with any Oracle Database as a Service running in the Oracle Cloud. That includes Autonomous Database Shared, Autonomous Database Dedicated, Exadata Cloud Service, and Database Cloud Service. DataSafe is included at no additional cost for Cloud at Customer. Remember, this is in limited availability, but it doesn't cost you anything to use it. So you can run DataSafe without paying a monthly fee for any of the database cloud services. If you want to use DataSafe for your on-premises databases or for your databases running on compute, that can be compute within Oracle Cloud, AWS, or Azure, then there's a $200 a month charge. Okay. Now, regardless of where you're running DataSafe, any of these scenarios, Each database that is registered with DataSafe gets up to 1 million audit records per month at no cost. If you exceed 1 million records per month, and if you've configured DataSafe to allow it to continue collecting audit data, even once you reach the limit, because you can turn that off to where it won't ever exceed 1 million records per month, then you're going to be charged 10 cents for every additional 10,000 records over the limit. And again, that's not 1 million for all your databases, that's 1 million per database, okay? So 10 cents per 10,000 records, I like to think of it as $10 for 1 million audit records, easier to kind of wrap my head around. So if you exceed 1 million audit records, we're going to charge you basically just to cover our storage costs. All right, so this is where we are now. Now, for each of these scenarios, autonomous database, databases on compute, databases on cloud at customer, and databases on premises, there is a slightly different registration path with slightly different nuances in how you set up things like networking, how you set up things like privileges. Prior to this OCI migration that we've already completed, this is something you can use now. Prior to this, you had to do some of that setup in the DataSafe console, some of that setup in the OCI console. With this change complete, everything is now done in the OCI console. Again, before the change, you sort of had to figure the networking out yourself. There was documentation and you could read through it and understand what you're doing. But now with the wizards, it is a much more guided path. We walk you through what you need to do. We'll even create things like private endpoints or on-premises connectors for you. So it gets to be a whole lot easier. As part of the migration to native OCI, we didn't just get these cool new wizards. We also got a lot of other benefits. One of the benefits we got is that we now have a complete set of APIs for target management. And remember what I said earlier, we're moving the rest of the functionality to OCI native over the next couple of months, and you're going to see more and more APIs coming out as we do this. What these APIs allow you to do is script operations. So let me give you an example of something you might want to script. This is a very common use case. We hear it multiple times a week. I want to use DataSafe to mask my non-production databases. Well, that's what data masking is for in DataSafe. All right. Without the APIs, you would create your non-production database, register your non-production database, create a sensitive data model, create a masking format model, and mask your data, at which point you could turn it over to your developers and it's risk-free. With these APIs, you can script all that so it all happens. You could say, okay, I want to clone my database, and there's APIs to do that. You could say, once I clone my database, I want to register it with DataSafe, and there's APIs to do that. Later this summer, when we have data masking moved into OCI native, you'll be able to also script the actual masking of the data. So these APIs are huge for people who are managing DataSafe or managing databases with database at large scale. If you're one of our customers that have thousands or tens of thousands of Oracle databases, and there are a lot of people out there like that, this is really, really important to have those APIs so that you can script things. Another thing that we've done with the move to OCI native is we've really standardized the privilege model. And you're going to see this in just a few minutes as Bettina gets into the demonstration portion of today. But before, all the privileges were managed in, or part of the privileges were managed in the OCI console, part of the privileges were managed in DataSafe. Now everything is managed in the OCI console, much, much easier to work with, and it gives you better granularity. As part of this migration for the privilege management, we have created a new OCI resource that you can grant or revoke privileges from. And this is the DataSafe target database. So if you want to control which of your DataSafe users are able to see which DataSafe or which target databases, which again, fairly common requirement, all of that is now done within OCI. All right. As we start to look at these wizards, and again, remember, you're not going to see the wizards until you've created the preliminary step. You must have migrated your resource groups to OCI, but as you've done that, when you first log into the console, or the OCI console, and you go to DataSafe, you're going to see down at the bottom of your screen 4 new wizards. And these wizards are registering an autonomous database, registering a cloud database, registering an on-premises database, and registering a database on compute. If you have joined the limited availability program, there is a 5th wizard that's already there. It's just hidden from view until you set the little flag that says you're a member of the limited availability program, and that is for registering an autonomous database on Exadata Cloud Service. Coming in the not too distant future will be the ability to register an autonomous database that is running at customer, because there's a new offering, autonomous database at customer, and that will also have its own wizard as we get closer to general availability for that. All right, so 5 different wizards that you can work with. The wizards generally manage everything for you. You're going to go through, they're going to set up the database details, how you're going to connect to the database, and set up all of your security rules for you. Okay. For cloud databases, the registration gets to be fairly simple. You just select the database. For Exadata Cloud or Exadata Cloud Services, because you are really registering the the pluggables that you create or the database services you create within XSCS, you have to tell it what your service name is going to be. For databases that are running on compute or on premises, you have to give a little bit more information. But in general, the first step is tell DataSafe about your database. Okay. The next step is going to be, how do we connect to the database? If you're running with a private IP address, you're going to be using a private endpoint. If you're running in a third-party cloud or on-premises, you're probably going to be using an on-premises connector. There's exceptions to that. Bettina will talk about them when she goes in just a few minutes. But there's, generally it'll be private endpoint or on-premises connector. If you're running autonomous database with a public IP address, then you don't need to set up connectivity option because you've got a public IP address. The next thing you're going to do is, assuming that your database is being controlled by Oracle networking, in other words, it's running in our cloud or accessed over our cloud, then you're going to have to define security rules. Do we allow DataSafe to connect to the database? Well, that's an ingress rule. Do we allow the data from that DataSafe is collecting to leave your virtual network to get back to DataSafe? There'll be an egress rule for that. Okay. I had mentioned, and again, we're going to cover this in just a second, that the privilege model has changed. So again, target databases are now OCI resources. You do need to have authorizations in OCI IAM, the Identity Access Management module, in order to manage those target databases. Now, for new databases, this should happen for you pretty much automatically as you're setting everything up. But for older databases where you're already using them in DataSafe, we didn't want to make you have to go out and migrate all of your thousands of databases over to this new model. So we've given you just a single button that will, if you click Create IAM Permissions from within the DataSafe console, the legacy console, this new button is visible, then you'll see a wizard pops up that says, here are the permissions you need to have. At the bottom of that is a go ahead and do it for me button. So with just 2 clicks, one to create the IAM permissions, one to actually provision those, you can have everything done for you. If you choose to, you can just copy those off and add them in manually, but we tried to make it as easy as we could for you. All right. And I guess that's enough preliminary work. Bettina, let me turn it over to you for the demo.
Thanks, Russ. So let me share my screen here. Okay, so what I would like to do is show you the wizards, how that works in our DataSafe console, and then also show you the authorizations that you need for the target databases that Russ just talked about. So if you're connected to your Oracle Cloud infrastructure, to your region and in your tenancy, you can find data safe in the left side menu under Oracle database, and then you have the entry here for data safe if you haven't used it yet. And then you see on my side, data safe is already enabled. So I see the service console here, and that is where I was typically registering my databases beforehand. But now you have the target databases here on the left-hand side. And let me show you, I already have a few databases that I have connected here. So in the data safe demo compartment, you see a few databases that I'm already using. And if you're going to the overviews page where we've just been, you see those wizards that Russ talked about. So we have now the autonomous database wizard, the Oracle Cloud databases, so all cloud databases except autonomous, then a wizard for on-premises databases. And we also have a wizard for if you're running Oracle databases on compute. And that could be, either running them in the on a compute node in the Oracle Cloud infrastructure, or also if you have an Oracle database in any other cloud environment, it could be Azure, AWS, or anything. Good. So let me show you the wizards. And as Russ was saying, it's really taking care of the end-to-end process. So let me show you the one for autonomous database here, for instance. You can see on the left-hand side, first we have this, we're selecting the database, and we're dealing with the connectivity option, and then security rules. So all these steps the wizard are taking care for me, and I don't have to really understand the OCI networking, how security rules work, and so on. The wizard will guide me through all of that. So the first thing is, let's select the database that we want to connect. And I have one here in my compartment. Compartment is data safe demo. This is the database I want to use. You see the database display name is also used for data safe, but you can always override it here, whatever makes sense for you. Okay, next step is then, now we have to deal with the connectivity options. So what the wizard is doing is it's automatically detecting where your database is running. So it's checking for the VCN, if this is a private VCN or if it is a public VCN. If it is a private VCN, then obviously we need to deal with, how do we allow communication from DataSafe into these private VCN. And for that, we're using something that's called a DataSafe private endpoint. And then DataSafe checks if for this private VCN, we already have a DataSafe private endpoint. In my case, I already created that. And then it's just using it here. It's automatically detecting it, it's using it here and gives me the information that this will be used. I also show you later, if you don't have a private endpoint, the wizard will take care of creating it for you. So I have another example where I show you also how we can create the private endpoint as part of the wizard here. Good, and then as I said, now we have a representation of DataSafe in your private VCN. Now we need to also allow communication. So we need to make sure that the database is allowed to talk to our DataSafe instance and that DataSafe is allowed to talk to the database. For that, if you ever worked with OCI networking, you need to have two security rules, one ingress and one egress rule. And you can have the wizard now create them for you. You see that here on top. We have the question here, if you want to add the security rules now, then we'll take care of that. Or if you have someone else in your companies that's dealing with network security rules, you can also say, no, I'll do that later. But then it obviously means until you've taken care of defining those rules, the database will be inactive. And only once we can communicate with the database, it will become active here in DataSafe. So in my case, I want to have them created for me. If you work with security rules, you might know you can either add them to a security list or to a network security group. In my case, I have an autonomous database that is that's running in a private VCN, and those always have a network security group associated. You create that when you're or you're assigning that when you're creating the database. So I'll just use the one that is anyway linked to my database here. And then as you see, I have an ingress rule and egress rule. So the ingress rule allows the communication from the database perspective. So it allows incoming traffic from a certain source port. So that would be my DataSafe private endpoint here on destination port 1522, which is my database port. To an ingress rule, you also have an egress rule, and the egress rule now defines which outgoing communication we're allowing. And this is now allowing DataSafe to have outgoing communication to destination, as mentioned here. And this is actually the IP address of my autonomous database. And then I can connect to port 1522. Good. Again, you don't have to really understand all of that. So DataSafe takes care of that. It creates these rules for you, but it gives you the information here on what we're creating on your behalf. Good. Next step is then just to review the information that we collected so far and then hit the registration button. I also want to show you another example. If you have a database, I have one in another compartment here. If you have a database that is securely accessible from everywhere, meaning it's running in a public VCN, then we don't really need to define all these connectivity options and security rules in addition. So we have a public IP address and we can connect to that. That's it. So in that case, as you can see, it's grayed out here on the left-hand side. It also tells you that selected database is configured to be securely accessible from everywhere, which means steps 2 and 3 are not necessary. So in this case, you just go ahead, next, you see the information that you have selected and hit the registration button here. And if your database, your autonomous database is running, in a secure VCN or is securely accessible from everywhere or running in a private VCN, that is a decision you make when you're creating the database. So you've seen these options probably, and then you can also switch that later on your autonomous console. Cloud databases, just want to show you one thing. If we go into the wizard here, you see there's one more step that you have to do. You can select the database here also from the list, but then on the bottom, it also asks you for the database username and password. So for a cloud database, we're not managing the user for you. For an autonomous database right now, we're managing the user automatically. So this is the user that DataSafe is using to connect to your database. You have to create that user before you can register your database. You have to give it a password, and then you see something here that's called download privilege script. So here you can download the privilege script and then grant privileges to this database user for using the features in DataSafe. So there is 5 rules, one for a security assessment, one for user assessment, one for activity auditing, and then one for discovery and one for masking. But it's super simple to use. Good. So that's the cloud databases. Other than that, it looks exactly as the autonomous database. And because we don't have time to go through all the wizards, I just want to show you also the on-premises database, which is more or less also this similar to the one for DB on compute. So here, if I start the wizard, obviously you can't select the database from a drop-down because the database is in your network, so we don't know about it. So I'm just giving it a name now. Let me choose the on-prem demo here. This is my on-premises database. Oops. So here now I need to provide more information, obviously. Because it's running on your premises, we cannot know where your service name or the port, the IP address. So here I have to provide that information. For cloud databases, we have that information from you, so you don't have to provide it. Password, okay. And now here for an on-premises database, you have 2 connectivity options. The first one is the on-premises connector. The second one is a private endpoint. So private endpoint is something you would use if you have a fast connect or VPN connect set up between your on-premises network and OCI. Then you can use a private endpoint to connect to that. And I'll talk about that in a moment. If you don't have that, then you can select an on-premises connector. And on-premises connector is a lightweight, small installation that you can install on any Linux host that you have in your network. We're recommending not running it on the database host, but that would work actually as well. And then if you have such an on-premises connector, we're creating it. You can create it here. It gives you an installation bundle. You install it on your network, and then it opens up a channel, a TLS tunnel actually, from your on-premises network to OCI here, and allows communication via this TLS tunnel. The on-premises connector, typically this is installed and up and running within, I don't know, less than 10 minutes. So it's really just a quick installation here. If you allow HTTPS communication from, your network to the internet, then that's all you need, and the on-premises connector should work. So let me show you the on-premises connector first, and then we'll talk about the private endpoint. So here, obviously, I need to enter the IP address of my database, the database port, which is 1527 here in my example. And then if you already created an on-premises connector earlier for other databases, you could reuse that and then just select it from the list. And I might have one, but let me just create a new one. All you have to do is you give it a name, you say where you want to store it, and then name, and you can optionally also have a description here. And then that's all you need, right? So we're creating the target register, or we're registering our target, we're creating an on-premises connector. And then obviously for this example, you would then still have to do the installation on your network, but we're guiding you through that step as well on the connectivity option. If you want to register an on-premises database, you see this little hint here. So we ask you to acknowledge that for on-premises databases, we're charging you. So Russ talked about that earlier. You've seen that on-premises databases is a charge of $200 per database per month for DataSafe. Good, but let me also show you the other options. So I talked about the on-premises connector. Private endpoint, as I said, is another option. So here, private endpoint, what it means is if you have Fast Connect or VPN Connect set up between your network and OCI, it basically means that you're extending a private VCN here in OCI to your own network. And anything we need to do, or the only thing we need to do here is then really create a private endpoint in that VCN that is connected to your on-premises network. And allow communication similar to what we've seen before. So you're selecting the private endpoint here. We're connecting via TCP or TLS. That's the choice you have. It's the same for on-premises connector. I'll make it easier for now. I'll use the TCP. Now here, DataSafe cannot decide if you already have an existing private endpoint in your VCN, yes or no, because we don't know which VCN is connected to your on-premises network. So you either can select one that you already created, or if you don't have one yet, you can say, no, I don't have an existing one. You're selecting it here, you're creating a new one, and you have to select in which VCN that the PE should be created. Let me select a subnet here as well. And then you can either enter a private IP address, or if you can, as you can see, it's optional. You can also have DataSafe create or assign a private IP address automatically for you, and that will be created in the subnet that you entered here. In my case, I have a private endpoint, so let me choose that one. So this is the same VCN that I used before. And then you go to next. And then it looks very similar to what you've seen for autonomous database. We have to create now the security rules for on-premises for the private endpoint. Again, we have the choice between adding it to a security list or a network security group. And then the only difference you see here is that you have only the egress rule. So the only thing you need to define is now outgoing traffic from the DataSafe private endpoint, that you're allowing that outgoing communication to the database on the destination port. The incoming traffic, because the database is not running in OCI, the incoming traffic, that is something you can monitor or limit or control on your network, but this is nothing you have to configure here in OCI. And then same thing, you hit next, and then you can acknowledge that you really want to register an autonomous an on-premises database here. Good. That was one part that I wanted to show you. And you see, you have the other visits here for the DB on compute as well. You can then decide if you want to run, if your database runs on OCI or any other cloud environment. So as you can see, the input will change depending on what type of database you're connecting. Other than that, it's very similar to the other wizards that we've seen already. One thing that I wanted to show you here under target databases, obviously, because target databases now has become an OCI resource, we need to have IAM policies in place to control who has access to the target databases. And I did create a policy just to show you how that looks like as an example. Let me go to root here. And I created one that I called Data Safe Target Database Manual because I created this one manually. And then basically what you're doing here is you're allowing certain groups, user groups, to manage target databases in compartment, and then you're defining which compartment. I have one here with it, which is a subcompartment. I have one where I only had the OCID, so you can do all of that. But basically, you define exactly who can manage your target databases, who can create it, who can update it, or who can deregister a target in DataSafe. And then let me go back to DataSafe here real quick. And then that really defines on which of these databases or how many databases you see here. My user right now has a lot of privileges, so I see a bunch of databases. If you have a different user, he might only see a subset of these databases. Good, but now how do you get these policies? Because you already have authorization set up in DataSafe. So let me go to the Service Console and show you how you've done that before. So I'm going to our UI here for all the other features. And then on the right-hand side, on the upper corner, you see security. So if I select that, then here is where you defined, which user group could manage which target databases in DataSafe and which features you are allowed to use. So let me select a compartment here to show you some examples. And as you can see, we have a lot of compartments here. Okay, let me show you this one. So here now, and I only need the ones that have some authorizations here. So here you see now for all the targets that are in the compartment DSCOM01, the administrators, the user group administrator can manage all the databases and use all the features. You can see they can do assessment, discovery, masking, and activity auditing. There are two other user groups, DSPMG01 and DSPMG02, who also can manage the databases in this compartment. And then there's the fourth one, because I don't see the user name here or group name, I'm assuming it's a user. I could look it up on OCI with the OCID here. But this user can only do manage on assessment and activity auditing. He cannot do discovery and masking, for instance. So this is how we set up security so far. And this is, this security settings here will stay until everything is migrated over to the new UI on the OCI side that Russ showed you about. But for targets, I showed you the IAM permissions or the policy. That is something we already have to do. And for that, we created this new button here called Create IAM Permissions. So if you hit that, it will create a policy on your behalf called Target Database, Data Safe Target Databases. And it will grant, based on the security settings you have right now, it will grant the privileges to the user groups for the certain compartments. So you see, for instance, here, allow group DSG01 to manage target databases in compartment G01 and so on, the next one and so on. So this is all based on the security settings here in DataSafe. And I showed you the settings for one compartment. If I would go through the other compartments, you would see exactly those user groups showing up there as well. In my demo environment here, as you can see, it's a lot of user or privileges that I have to create. But you can have DataSafe taking care of that. If you hit this blue button here, then we will create the policy on your behalf. The other option that you have, obviously, is you can just copy the statements here and then create the policy yourself, or as I said, have DataSafe doing it for you. So this is for the grants. There is another thing, as you can see, is we might also have to create certain IAM user groups. And the reason is very simple. So IAM only knows user groups. So you cannot grant privileges to an individual via the IAM policies. It always has to be based on a user group. And in DataSafe, we also typically set up privileges on the user group, but there's one exception where we're setting up authorizations on a user level. And that is if you ever registered an autonomous database in DataSafe by clicking, for instance, on the autonomous console for the registration, the user that is registering the autonomous database also got privileges in DataSafe for managing that specific database. And because we cannot assign now the privileges to that individual user, we have to create user groups so that we can allow that user group then to manage that specific database or databases in that compartment. So here you can see then we're creating on your behalf the user groups called DataSafe Target Databases Group 1 to 1, 2, 3, and so forth. And you can also see which users will belong to this user group. So you see I have one DataSafe Target Database Group 1 that has a user DSPM U01 and my own user here. And then if I want to understand, which targets would that user group be able to manage, then I can check. Oh, let me close it here. I can go back in here and check for this user group that we've just seen. If I scroll down here, here it is. So the user group DataSafe Target Database Group 1 is then able to manage target databases in this compartment DataSafe demo. But as I said, you don't have to look into all the details. You can just hit this button and we're creating the policy similar to the one that I showed you before on your behalf. And also the user groups, if necessary, we're creating those on your behalf. Good, that's all I wanted to show you in the live demo. If there are any questions or anything else you guys would like to see, let us know in the Q&A. If not, then I'll hand it back over to Russ and we can finish the slides that we had prepared.
There's not really a ton more I wanted to go over, but if you would like to learn more about the new target database registration and the things that Bettina and I have talked about today, I just want to show you where to find that information. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the DataSafe documentation, and I want to show you the easiest way to get there. So we'll go to docs.oracle.com/database. And once we're there, we'll click on Related Products. We'll choose Database Security, and DataSafe is right here. We'll click on All Documentation. And then over here on the right-hand side at the bottom, we'll see Register a Target Database. This takes us to Chapter 3 of the DataSafe Manual, which is all about database target registration. From here, you can learn about pre-registration tasks, which are things you need to do before you register. You learn about the 4 different wizards that are now available for everybody. As soon as the Exadata Cloud Service exits limited availability and is generally available, that will be here as well. But this tells you everything you need to know about target database registration. In Chapter 4 are a couple of the other topics that we talked about. Migrating resource groups to compartment. You remember this is the first part of this massive migration we're doing to OCI native. Should have already been done, but if yours isn't yet, don't worry, you've still got time to do it. And it also talks about that one step that Bettina showed you where we go into the legacy DataSafe console to migrate the old permissions to the new permission model. So how to do that? Again, that's docs.oracle.com/database. Select related products and database security, click on all documentation, and then click on register a target database. And that's really it for today, for the July office hours. Our next session is going to be Wednesday, the 11th of August, and our topic is going to be a really exciting one. In the July release update, the one that's coming out next week, one of the things we're going to be doing is backporting a 21C feature called Gradual Database Password Rollover to 19C. Now, this is, if you're a DBA, one of the best things since sliced bread, because it lets you give a password to a database user, change that password, and then control for a brief period of time how long the old password and new password will both work. Imagine that the password you're changing is for a service account or an application account. With this new feature, you'll be able to change the password in the database and then at your leisure, go out and update the application properties files or your cron jobs or whatever's using the service account to use the new password. Again, that's going to be our topic for August's office hours, and we look forward to seeing you there.